So this is a brief video for the capacitor replacement for a Bernina 530 and 730. It also applies to the 530-1 and the 530-2, which is the machine that we're doing this on today. So we've got this beautiful Bernina 532, and the first thing we're going to do is remove the motor housing. Now, it's quite good if you've got something soft to lean the machine over on here. It's not ideal to be leaning the machine onto its knobs and buttons, simply because they're getting old. So if you've got something soft to lean it on, that's a good thing. It's not quite as bad with the 532 because it's a knee controlled machine, so the knee lift actually does negate some sort of pressure put onto those buttons and dials. So got the two screws at the bottom of the machine. They need to be undone firstly. That will remove the motor housing. And now we can see what we're faced with. This motor will look slightly different if you've got the 730 with this type of motor or any of the other 530s. That's simply because this is a knee controlled machine. So part of the controller is housed on top of the motor. This motor hadn't been open for quite some time, so just giving it a quick wipe off with a cloth with a little bit of alcohol there, just to get rid of the cobwebs and any of the nasties inside the machine. So the next thing to do is going to be to actually remove the motor from the machine. Here you can see I'm not using anything soft anymore. So we've got the two big black screws. They have a centering washer around them, so when you remove those, they're going to release the machine and the motor coupling. So this is the last screw coming out. So now we can carefully start to lift the motor away from the machine. The first thing to remove is the motor drive belt, and just be careful, we've got these two black wires here. They are the wires that go up to the light. So there's a couple of little screws there that I'm undoing. You need to be careful with these. They're quite little short screws, and they have tiny little washers as well. So once we undo those screws and put them somewhere safe, we're then able to fully remove the motor from the sewing machine, and then it's free to work on. So as you can see, this is the motor removed from the machine, and this is the capacitor. This kind of silver barrel, that's what we're going to replace, and also the little bleed resistor that is between the terminals, the same part actually that we removed the light wires from. So with the motor now released from the machine and the machine out of the way, just going to give it a quick wipe over again, just so our hands don't end up totally black from the carbon that's come from the brushes of the machine. So here I'm just selected a replacement resistor for the motor. Now, it's advisable that you replace this. It's a 2.2 mega ohm resistor, and whilst you've got the motor out, you may as well. So we're just going to now get the new capacitor. The dimensions of the capacitor are very similar to the original, as you can see here. They have 4 wires, and there's more than enough wire here to do the job. In fact, the yellow wire is going to need to be chopped down, because if you leave it that length, it's just gets a little bit in the way. But this capacitor does fit some other machines, so that's why we need to adapt the wires slightly. So with this machine, in order to release the original capacitor, I just need to undo these 2 screws. So now we can lift up the little controller here and remove the metal bracket that's holding the capacitor. Now, if your machine is not a 532, you won't have this white ceramic controller block. So now's the time just to have a little look how everything's connected, where it's connected to, so you know what you're going to do when you get your soldering iron out to replace the actual capacitor. So I'm loosening off the screws here that have the resistor and the first 2 wires of the original capacitor attached. Now, they're the easiest 2 to replace. You also have a wire that goes to the back of the white ceramic block and down to the ground. So the one going to the white ceramic block is the blue wire on the new capacitor. The yellow is the ground. So we're going to strip back some of these wires just with our wire stripper to expose the copper. I always like to give it a little bit of a twist just so that they don't fray out. But yeah, the first 2, I'll probably strip those a bit long, to be honest with you, in hindsight. And as I said before, the yellow wire is much longer than we need, so I'm probably going to cut that in half, to be honest with you. We don't need that much wire, so just give it a snip, and then we can just quickly strip the end off that wire as well. And then that's pretty much the new capacitor prepared. Now we're just going to take our soldering iron, and the first thing I think we're going to do is just detach this wire here. So this wire is running to the capacitor. We don't really want to detach the other wire if we can help it. So just heat up the solder, and we should just be able to pull that wire away like so. So all that's left now connecting the original capacitor to the motor is the ground wire, or the earth, and that's the capacitor removed. So this is just showing you now the location of that resistor that I was talking about previously. As you can see here, the 2 screws that hold that in place and that were holding the 2 wires from the capacitor in place. So we've removed the resistor now. So now we're going to start attaching the new capacitor. We're going to start with the blue wire. Simply, I find it easier to do the blue than the yellow, and lastly the 2 wires that are actually screwed into place. So get all the soldering out the way in one go whilst the iron's hot. So that's the first wire being put in place. We're going to turn the motor around and solder the yellow wire, which is the ground wire, back into position Sorry about the camera position here. There we go. I moved it once I realised that we weren't quite in shot. So that's the earth wire or the ground wire, wherever you are in the world, now in place. So that's the trickiest bit done, really. Now we have these two wires, which are going to sit where the resistor sits. Like I say, I trim them a little bit on the long side, so I'm just going to give them a little cut down, and then add a little bit of solder just to neaten up the edges of these wires. So that's the ends of these wires now. Just having a bit of solder added on, just so that they slot neatly in behind the little holding bracket that they're going to go behind. A little bit of extra solder to the back of the black one there. I think there's a bit too much copper showing. You don't have to do this. You can kind of twist them in place, but yeah, I prefer to add a little bit of solder there. Next we're going to pop in the new resistor, so that just sits with its tag ends behind the little bracket. Hopefully you'll see that in just a second. There we go, like so. Feel free to pause this video on any points where it's a bit hard to see. I'm not a professional video maker, as you can tell, but yeah, it just gives you a bit more of an idea of what's going on. So, oops, just cutting down the tag ends on the resistor to make that nice and neat. Now we have to do is slot the wires, so it's red then black, so red's going behind this bracket. It's easier to push in with that solder. So that's the red one. And we might need to loosen that up a little bit. And a bit more. So we've now tightened up the two clamping screws for the red and black wire along with the resistor, and the next thing to do is just get everything back in place. So just have a little look, the best way to get that capacitor in place with the wires so that it can sit under its clamp. Now, like I say, it's a lot easier if you don't have this particular machine, as you don't have the controller block in the way. The controller block does make this a little bit awkward, but not too fiddly. So we've got this little bit of paper insulation that just slots underneath this controller, has two holes that those screws sit through, and then that gets followed by the clamp. Just make sure everything's lined up. And we want to flip that around, just keep the pressure on it, hold it all together, and then slide the capacitor underneath this clamp. And then we're good to screw everything back down onto the main body of the motor. So there we have it. Hopefully you've been able to follow along and either have used this video as you've done it, or just give you an idea of what's involved in swapping that capacitor out for the new one. There's a couple of other things you can do with the motor. We'll be checking the motor brushes and a few other bits and pieces, cleaning the commutator, but this video is mainly for switching out this capacitor. We sell quite a lot of these. There will be links in the description of the video where you can buy the capacitors and where you can buy the LED bulbs as well. They're all available in our store, which is www.justsosewingmachines.co.uk. So we're going to bring the machine back now. The first thing to do is probably reconnect those light wires. So just going to give that sort of motor bay a quick rub down, just to get rid of some of that dirt in there. And we're now going to start housing the motor back in. So need to connect the light wires, as I previously said, and we need to put that motor belt also around the back of the motor. So just going to take the screws that we removed earlier with their centering washers and just loosely attach them to the base of the motor. Once we've got that kind of in situ, we can then just hook the motor pulley round the spindle of the motor. Now we can start tightening that screw up. We don't want it too tight, we just want it so it holds it in place. Then we can grab the other screw and check everything lines up before we tighten down and lock everything in. So now we're just going to reconnect up the light wiring with the two little screws. Each screw has a little washer, so we're probably going to start those off by hand, just get them lined up, and that's everything rewired, and we'll be good to put the housing back over the motor. So here I'm just checking that the push for the foot control is working correctly. I say foot control, it's a knee lift control, and you could actually see the knee lift moving in the background as I pushed that lever. So we're just going to pop the motor housing on. Just make sure that it goes on. You don't feel like there's any real resistance or anything. Sometimes you can get one of those wires sort of trapped, but yeah, just make sure everything sits on nicely. We put on the 2 screws underneath here that hold the cover on, and again do one sort of lightly, move across to the opposite end, and then we can lock that one down tight, and then go back to the first screw just to give it its final sort of tightening up. So we've pretty much as standard now started putting LED bulbs into our machines. This is the bulb we use. They're 240 volt to 110 volt 1 watt LED bulbs. They give a really nice bright light to the machine. So all that's left is for us to check the machine runs, switch the light on, and thanks for watching. I hope this has been an informative video for you all.